Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
In a video posted on Twitter last night, Jeremy Corbyn launched a fresh assault on Britain's bankers. When bankers say the Labour Party is a threat, they're right, Mr Corbyn said. Let's take a look.
Nurses, teachers, shop workers, builders, well, just about everyone is finding it harder to get by. While Morgan Stanley's CEO paid himself £21.5 million last year, and UK banks paid out £15 billion in bonuses, Labour is a growing movement of well over 500,000 members and a government in waiting that will work for the many. So when they say we're a threat, they're right. We're a threat to a damaging and failed system that's rigged for the few.
Now, Helen, we all know that Mr Corbyn's a socialist. He doesn't need to persuade his supporters that he's an enemy of the banking sector. Would it be more effective as a political strategy to try and reach out to the business community and persuade some people who weren't necessarily inclined to vote for Mr Corbyn to vote for him? Well,
they have been doing that. They have had meetings with businesses. But there are a couple of interesting points here. The first is that Labour has almost no big donors anymore. You know, that sort of new Labour era where they had, you know, the sort of Sainsbury's and other people like that. They are now, and they see themselves as a grassroots membership organisation funded by small donations from individual members.
A vast number of small donations.
Yeah, so they feel themselves kind of to be less in hock to big business in that sense. And the other thing is, you know, maybe Tim will disagree with me here, but big business has, the Tory party has thrown away some of its advantage with big business by supporting Brexit, which most people will say, you know, if you talk to people in the business community, will say they see either as a threat or certainly as a big disruption and that they would rather not happen. So that kind of way that the Tories always were seen to have that kind of idea that we're sound, you know, we're the ones who are promising stability and continuity, and Labour are a threat to that, that advantage has been eroded by Brexit.
OK, Tim, you're both prolific tweeters. This was a video that Corbyn put out on Twitter last night, and he's been very effective at using social media to circumvent journalists. But he's also a cover star, because he's now on the front cover of GQ magazine. And he looks, well, you can tell me what you think of how he looks, but are we beginning to see the emergence of a coherent, perhaps even a convincing media strategy? Effective use of social media to mobilise young people, and there he is, he's on the front cover of GQ magazine.
My goodness, looking Prime Ministerial.
Prime Minister, I never thought you'd say that about Jeremy Corbyn. But is this an effective media strategy he's using now?
It's been one of the most extraordinary phenomena of politics over the last few years, certainly one I did not predict, is how much Jeremy Corbyn's personality has underpinned the Labour success. And so you have actually a very radical Labour agenda. And I think if John McDonnell had been the leader and the front man for that, I think that sort of John McDonnell's a much more aggressive character. I think it would have frightened people, but you know, the guy who makes jam and has an allotment and doesn't seem to get angry very much, he's almost the perfect front person for what is a radical agenda. And the Conservatives somehow need to get the focus much more on the policy issues and the dangers of Labour's economic policies and away from the personality. And it is interesting how much Labour is now going for a strategy that looks more Blairite than a sort of momentum.
And also the control they exercise, because Dylan Jones, the editor of GQ, was on the Today programme this morning saying that he's never seen an operation quite like the media operation around Corbyn. They'd be pretty chuffed with that magazine cover, wouldn't they? I
think so, but the other thing is they are very defensive of him, and actually that's the other thing I think you find in Jeremy Corbyn's most ardent supporters as well. They feel very defensive about him. They feel he's had he's written off completely by what they see as the mainstream media from the start. No one gave him any respect. And now they feel they have to protect him, which is a kind of... I mean, this is where I think the accusations of a cult of personality come from, because they do feel that personally, you know, he has come under intense attack. But I think Tim is absolutely right in the sense that what they've done is build a brand that is about jam, the kind of socialist Santa kind of brand that he's got. And the Tory attacks went in for this man is dangerous, he's going to take you back to the 1970s, it's going to be like Venezuela. And you look at that, you think drain covers and jam, and you just can't put the two together. They did not work at the last election.
I'm struggling to put those two together in my head right now. Thank you both very much indeed.
Jeremy Corbyn has publicly hit back at one of America's biggest banks, saying it is right to regard him as a threat. It follows a warning from Morgan Stanley that nationalising industries and higher taxes under a Labour government could damage the valuation of UK companies. And this is how the Labour leader responded.
Bankers like Morgan Stanley should not run our country, but they think they do. Because the party they fund and protects their interests, the Conservative Party, is in Downing Street. That's why they want to keep the Tories there, because their rigged economy and their tax cuts for the richest work for them. So when they say we're a threat, they're right. We're a threat to a damaging and failed system that's rigged for the few.
Well, that rebuttal isn't the only reason the Labour leader is in the headlines today. He's appeared on the cover of men's fashion and lifestyle magazine GQ. His apparent airbrushed cover photo has received mixed reactions. Let's talk to the former advisors to the Labour Party, Scarlett Maguire, and co-founder of Novara Media, Aaron Bastani. Many thanks indeed to you both for joining us this afternoon. Aaron, if I can firstly start with you. For a PR move, is this the right thing for Jeremy Corbyn to do, to be taking on Morgan Stanley?
Well, I think it's just a continuation of his fundamental political messaging over the course of the last 2 years, which is Britain needs dramatic change. As the budget confirmed last week, the economy is not working for regular people, be it on growth, productivity or wages. And he wants to bring that change about. And fundamentally, that will mean a rupture with a politics which has seen elites in Downing Street and at Westminster in hock to major banks. That's got to end, and it's going to end.
Scarlett, not quite a rebranding exercise for Mr Corbyn, because we've heard this all before from him, so what's he up to?
Well, I mean, I think what he's saying is there's a difference between banks like Morgan Stanley, where the chief executive earns, what, £20 million a year, who basically speculate and gamble, and British industry. Because what's so interesting is that in the last year, the Labour Party actually has cozied up to industry. So the CBI is quite happy to have a Labour government, particularly because it'll probably be better for us leaving the EU. We don't want a hard Brexit if you're Labour. But what he's saying is there's a difference between proper businesses and banks like Morgan Stanley, who he calls gamblers and speculators.
Aaron, not the only reason that Mr Corbyn is in the headlines today. He's appeared in GQ magazine. Was that the right move for him to do?
I thought so. I thought it was a cracking image. You know, I don't really have much time for GQ. I'm probably not its target. Well, actually, I probably am its target audience. Tells you something about how poorly it's doing. But I saw that cover. I thought, great picture. I'm going to buy a copy. I'm going to read it. And then, of course, Dylan Jones was on BBC Today on the radio saying that he was present at the interview or the photo shoot, and Jeremy Corbyn was being walked around like a grandpa. Turns out he was present at neither, and that he was lying. I think Dylan Jones should stick to writing about cashmere socks. Let the politicians get on with the politics. But the front cover is phenomenal. The average punter will walk past that, say, this looks like a Prime Minister. And it was called Election Special 2018. And that was a mistake, but I think there will be an election, and I think Jeremy Corbyn will win it.
Yeah, Mr Jones isn't here to answer those allegations. We did talk to him a little bit earlier on in the programme. Scarlett, your thoughts on Mr Corbyn in this interview in GQ?
Well, clearly something went wrong, didn't it? I mean, I've read the bits of interview, and frankly, they're boring. I mean, I would not buy the magazine to read it. I think it's absolutely right. The cover is great. It appears that it's been airbrushed, which is hardly Mr Corbyn's fault. I do think there's a problem with the editor of a magazine going on and slagging off somebody who's in it. And it's not a good interview. It's supposed to be an interview to find out what is the Jeremy Corbyn effect, and actually it doesn't tell us anything that we don't already know. So I'm not quite sure what happened. Clearly there was a mismatch, and I think it was good that the Corbyn team decided to go for GQ. It didn't work, but in the end they won. They get a fantastic cover, and GQ gets a rather dull interview.
Aaron, let's look at the bigger picture. What was Mr Corbyn and his team trying to do?
I think, you know, GQ is the quintessential magazine for what they call centrist dads. He's probably trying to make a bit of an inroad there with men, let's say, between 35, 55. It's probably a good way to do it. But yes, the interview's not particularly interesting because Dylan Jones has a political agenda. This man paid David Cameron £20,000 to write a book about him. And he's big fans with George Osborne. He's the last of the Cameroons lying on the radio today. You know, really couldn't even tell the truth right till the end. And I think that's why. I think you need to have a sincere, authentic relationship and interaction with your subject, regardless of your own views. And I think fundamentally GQ as a publication can't do that because Mr Jones is a Conservative. He is a Cameroon.
Scarlett?
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree. I mean, if you read what Dylan Jones said, whether he was telling the truth or not, if you then read the interview, you think, what on earth were they doing? And then you really think, given how angry they were. I mean, Jeremy isn't always the easiest person to deal with, and clearly the interviewer and him didn't get on. The interviewer got nothing out of him. To give him this fantastic cover, which hundreds of thousands more people are going to look at the cover and think this is a man who looks like a prime minister than are going to bother to read it. I mean, I can understand what Jeremy Corbyn did. I cannot understand what GQ were doing.
Aaron, should Alistair Campbell have conducted the interview? We're not exactly sure who turned him down, whether it's Mr. Corbyn or whether it's somebody else in his team, but do you think he should have done it?
No, I think Alistair Campbell has nothing to add to the public conversation at the moment. He's certainly been a very bad judge, not just of Mr. Corbyn, but actually where the public is at in regard to the results of the last general election. So, no.
Scarlett, just very briefly.
I think it would have been a much better interview. I can understand why, if it was Jeremy Corbyn who turned it down, I can understand why he did it, because Alistair Campbell hasn't come out. But I actually think it would have been much more fun to read, and I actually think they would have got on much better as well.
Scarlett, Aaron, many thanks indeed. Good to see you both.